Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. I'm John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Before we get to our interview, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the Film Florida podcast. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you like what you hear on the podcast, please consider going to our website and donating $20.22 for our 2022 fundraising campaign. We also have a Film Florida merchandise page. Visit filmflorida.creator-spring.com to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and more. Nick Pavonetti is an Emmy-nominated producer, having worked on many television series, including This Is Us, Only Murders in the Building, Grandfathered, The Neighbors, Criminal Minds, Suspect Behavior, 10 Things I Hate About You, and Titus, just to name a few. We talked to Nick about getting his start in the industry, his evolution as a producer, his advice for others, his love of filming in Miami, and more on this episode of the Film Florida podcast. Here's my conversation with Nick Pavonetti. Welcome to the Film Florida podcast, Nick.
Hi, thanks.
So let's start with your origin story. Where'd you come from?
I was born in Chicago, and then at a very young age, we moved to Connecticut and then down to Texas, to Houston. And by the time I was 6, I kind of grew up in Houston, went to high school in Houston, went away to college, went to Ole Miss, stayed in the South, and then came back to Houston and didn't really know what I was doing. I started waiting tables, but that's kind of where I started down a creative path. I started writing novels. I wanted to be a novelist off the bat. So kind of where it all started was back then. And then after that, I drove around the country on a motorcycle and ended up in Chicago a couple of years in 96 or so, and was there until 99 when I came out here to LA and fell head over heels into television.
So that answers the when part of the next question, but how and why did you first become interested in the entertainment industry?
I first became interested in the television and entertainment industry watching David Letterman. Funny enough, he had on Bill Cosby, and he was talking about making television shows and being a producer and an executive producer. And he was saying how, in only the way David Letterman can, that those fat cats behind the camera, that's the sweet job. And I was like, I never thought about that before. And it kind of opened my eyes to something, because, my dad, we're in Texas. I'm in high school at that time, and my dad's a real estate broker, and I kind of thought I'd end up in some sort of world like that. But I ultimately came to Hollywood because, like I said, I was writing novels and trying to become a novelist, and I met a girl, as we do, who was an actress, and she wanted to come out and try the big time, and I was like, well, okay, I'm writing novels. What do I care? I could do that anywhere. And then we hooked up with a friend of mine that I grew up with, whose brother was an associate producer doing post-production on a show called Then Came You for ABC. It was a very short-lived sitcom. And I ended up getting a PA job on that. And that was the beginning of the career.
So tell us a little bit about that, quote unquote, first job in the industry. What did you do?
Let me tell you, it was the craziest way I got the show. My then fiance, who I'm no longer with, I have my wife that I'm with now. She and I came out to look for an apartment from Chicago, and we stayed with my friend Rob, and his brother was the associate producer. He's like, what are you going to do when you come out here? And I'd been bartending to pay the bills and trying to write in Chicago. And I said, well, I'll just bartend or whatever to pay the bills, and I'll just keep writing. It's like, well, that's the hardest job in the world to get out here, because all the actors want to, wait tables and bartend and everything. Oh, never really thought about that. He's like, you want to be a PA? My brother's show just got picked up by ABC. I was like, what's a PA? And he, the runner, he kind of explained what a PA is, a gopher, do whatever needs to be done in the office, an assistant. And I was like, sure, why not? And I got there the first day, and I realized that this was my shot. This was it. I realized that I was given a golden ticket to something, and that it was special, and that I never was going to let go.
Nice. Well, it kind of worked out a little bit, which we'll get into. So, but your first, major credit on the IMDb was being part of the production staff on the comedy series Titus, which was a really funny show. How did you get that job, and kind of define what production staff really meant?
Well, I got that job because my boss on Then Came You then moved to that. We were on the Fox lot. This show was on the bungalow next to us. Sometimes people just move, just depending on how
Hmm.
shows come out. We just kind of moved to that show. I was, again, a production assistant. I copied scripts, I delivered scripts, production reports. I did my boss's paperwork, whatever kind of, her mileage or whatever she needed to get done. I would go pick up lunches and coffee for the writers. It was an entry level position. And honestly, now the people getting those positions are fighting tooth and nail for it. And like I said, I
Hmm.
just fell into that. I can't even tell you how lucky I feel to have gotten those jobs now.
Well, and between, after Titus, you worked on a number of shorts, TV series, films, um, and your career has gone from that to where you are now. Is there anything in that, 2000, early 2000s that kind of sticks out that really set you on the path of exactly where you wanted to go in your career?
I was talking about my first boss. Her name's Kim Sherwood. She was an early influence on my career. But during those years that you're talking about, I met three people
Okay.
that really were a big influence on my career. It was Chris Smirnoff, Jeff Morton, and Dan Fogelman. And I worked with all of them at the same time on certain projects. Chris Smirnoff is now the producer on A Million Little Things up in Vancouver. He took me and taught me post production. I remember there was a time where he'd be like, okay, call and get us a tape for the composer. And this is back in the days of tape. I call Modern Video Film. I'd be like, hey, we need to get a composer tape. They're like, oh, what format? Oh, 3/4. Okay. And I just have to ask him the questions because I didn't know the answers. And he took the time to teach me that. And we had a great time. And he taught me post. And then Jeff Morton was our boss. He was the producer on the shows that we did. And then when I moved up high enough and Chris and I went our separate ways, I worked with Jeff for a couple of years. And he was very instrumental in teaching me how to be smart about my decisions on money and where to focus my attention and how to do a good job in television. And then, of course, I started working with Dan Fogelman, and we started working on a show called The 12th Man, which was about the last player on a basketball team, on the NBA team. And we did some other pilots, a semi famous pilot called Lipschitz Saves the World that didn't go anywhere with Leslie Nielsen, which was amazing to meet Leslie Nielsen. First time I met Leslie Nielsen. I went up behind him because I wanted to introduce myself to him. And he's sitting there eating this big chocolate brownie. And I go, excuse me, Mr. Nielsen? He turns to me and he has a big piece of chocolate right on the side of his face. And he smiles and he goes, yes. And it was like something straight out of a movie. That's when I started working with Dan Fogelman, and he created This Is Us. We worked on a lot of shows. We did a lot of pilots. We did Gallivant, which is definitely a highlight of my career.
Hmm.
Uh, we did Pitch, which is another highlight of my career. And then, of course, I did 6 years of This Is Us.
But in 2009, after that period, you got attached to the ABC Family series, 10 Things I Hate About You. And if I remember correctly, that was one of the early shows that dealt with teenage angst. It wasn't just warm and fuzzy teeny bopper stuff. It was a little different.
That show focused the main character on the flaws that every teenager sees, I think, and the hardships of life. And the heroine in that show definitely stayed to her principles, and it showed the negative side of that. So yeah, it was something a little different. It was probably a little ahead of its time. So yeah.
Yeah, it definitely was ahead of its time. Looking at what's on there on TV now versus what was back then, it definitely was. And starting a little bit before this time, but from this point forward, it seemed like you stuck with mostly television series as opposed to films. Was that specifically on purpose, or was that just where the jobs came?
It's just where the jobs came. I
Yeah.
mean, it has been where my contacts are. Like I said, I met Dan Fogelman, and he has kept me employed for a long, long time. And then now that This Is Us is over, I'm still working on a project, Only Murders in the Building, that he's involved with. But it's also, I'm branching out into a lot of other things because of working for him.
Yeah. And now from 2010 to 2017, you worked on a lot and a lot of different series, and they were all over the map. You mentioned a couple of them, like we had the Deep End, which was young lawyers. We had Criminal Minds Suspect Behavior, which was, Criminal Minds. The Secret Circle was a little supernatural. The Neighbors was a sitcom. Gallivant was a period show. Grandfathered was a comedy. Pitch was a little bit more dramatic. You've touched pretty much everything. What did you learn about working in all those different genres?
Gallivant was a musical.
Right.
That was Alan Menken. I mean, that was big time musical. The one thing that I have been lucky with in my career is I have been able to do everything and I haven't been pigeonholed. I've been able to do comedy, I've been able to do drama, done some musicals. The upcoming season of Only Murders in the Building is going to have a big, huge musical aspect to it, which I'm very excited about. So, yeah, I've got to do everything, and I've been very lucky. The opportunities have been put in front of me, and I've said yes, and people have let me do it. And now that I just have done it, people are like, okay, you've done that before.
Do you have a favorite though?
A favorite genre?
Yeah.
I really love musicals, which is fun. It's because there's so much to it. There's so many layers to it, and you can take the early product and really turn it into something wonderful in the end. But to me, if you're with good people, it really makes a difference. If you're happy to wake up and go to work, that's it. Because I've been on both shows. I've been on the
Mhm.
ones where I wake up and I have I used to say, okay, I have those 5 minutes of bliss before it hits me of what happens in the day. And then I have those other shows, when I get to work for Kevin Falls or someone like that, where I'm like, I get to go see the people I really like. So yeah, when you're with the people you enjoy, it's really great, and that's the best part.
So then in 2016, you kind of alluded to this, you get connected to this new NBC show called This Is Us.
Mhm.
Talk about the beginning part of that. Did you have any sense of what it was going to be and how it was all going to play out?
Okay, so at that time, I was already hooked up with Dan Fogelman, and we were doing two shows for ABC. We were finishing up Grandfathered with John Stamos
Hmm.
and Gallivant. Dan had two pilots that year. He had switched his deal to 20th Century Fox, and he had two pilots. He had the Pitch pilot, which was about the first female baseball player,
Hmm.
and then of course the This Is Us pilot. And they didn't want him to do both pilots at the same time, so the This Is Us pilot they were shooting earlier than traditional pilot season.
Okay.
So they, being ABC, were like, you can't leave. You can't do this pilot for another studio. You work for us.
Hmm.
So I was like, oh man, what do I do? I wanted to do this pilot. I even threatened to quit. And Dan was like, don't worry about it. You'll do the series. We'll just bring somebody on to do the pilot. And you'll do the pitch pilot because that'll be fine. That's regular pilot season. You'll be able to do that.
Hmm.
So anyway, this is kind of a funny story too. So I go to meet the producer of This Is Us, and he's like, Dan told me, what's going to happen. You'll come in and do the series, but we got to find somebody. So I went to the studio. They gave me three names. A guy I can't remember, a guy named Garfield Whitman, who I had PA'd with on Titus. He and
Oh,
I were
wow.
old time buddies, okay? And he is now a post production producer as well. And a guy named Dieter, I can't remember Dieter's last name at this point. Anyway, so first guy comes in, he gives a fine interview because I'm sitting in the interviews with Steve Beers, who we're going to decide who this person is.
Mm.
And then Garfield comes in, my old buddy, just a great guy, surfer type, like sports, just somebody you could sit around having a beer with, just an easy to get along guy. And he has a great interview. We get done with that. Steve looks at me and goes, wow, that was a really good interview. I go, yeah, that was great. I think probably he's going to get the job. I said that to Steve. And then Dieter comes in, and Dieter is much quieter, very competent. You could tell very competent in what he did, but quiet, not as big a personality, less of that likableness that Garfield has. Not any sort of a detriment to Dieter, but Garfield has that kind of pull where you want to be his friend. So after we're done, I start thinking about this, and Steve's like, well, what do you think? I go, it's definitely Dieter. And he's like, really? I go, yeah, I think he's going to do a great job. In my mind, I'm like, I love Garfield, but I don't want to lose this job because Dan's thinking, I love this guy. I want to keep him around. So Sometimes it's a dog eat dog world, I guess. But yeah, so Dieter did a fine job on the pilot, and then turned it over to me, and that's how I started on that series. And really, as far as getting a sense of it being a giant hit, we kind of knew when it got more hits on Facebook than any other TV show in history. It
Mm.
had like 70,000 hits to watch the trailer in like the first day and a half or something like that. So that's when all our ears kind of perked up and we're like, wait, what's going on? And it was just such a great show right out of the box. So
Yeah. And you started your official title was co-producer, and then you moved into a producer role. Give people a sense of what your role was throughout the entire series.
I started off as a co-producer, and my number two is Tim Barker. He is the associate producer. He ended up as the associate producer. And I guess at the beginning, I was more hands-on in everything that happened. I mean, making sure that coffee was delivered at the right time, if you will.
Hmm.
Lunches, getting everything scheduled, going to all the meetings and stuff. But then as Tim moved up, I released some of that to him and focused on more of the big picture, just making sure that we can stay on budget, or doing the Super Bowl episode for
Hmm.
season 3, so that we could do special episodes and things like that. And Tim was more involved in the day to day, writing out POs and doing the more mundane paperworky stuff. So I just became more of a planning, execution, idea type thing.
And now the show was huge, as we talked about. It was nominated for 3 Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Drama, one of the most popular television shows for a couple of years there. As someone that was deeply involved in the series, what do you attribute that success, and why did so many people like the show?
I think people like TV shows that they can associate with one or all of the main characters. And I feel like, even though some of these characters, Kevin was a movie star, and Randall ended up running for president in the end. These are giant characters, but we felt their issues. We
Hmm.
felt connected to them, whether it be the struggle with alcohol or weight or anxiety or dealing with a person. I mean, to me, my favorite character in the whole series was Beth, and the way she dealt with Rand and his ambitions and demons and all the things that made up the great three-dimensional character. That's why it was a success, because everybody found somebody on that show that was like, okay, that's like me. That's my problem.
And then somewhere in this period, unless I'm mistaken, the only Florida-based credit you have is the pilot of The Baker and the Beauty, which was filmed in South Florida. You did that pilot in the middle of your time on This Is Us. What do you remember about that shoot, and how do you like filming in Florida?
I love Miami. Okay, I am a huge fan of Miami. It is one of my favorite cities. It is beautiful. And David Frankel did a great job. It was beautiful. That pilot, he found those great Art Deco buildings with the lights and
Hmm.
shooting over the water. And I mean, it's just such a dramatic city for, in that pilot that fell in love. You can have action. You can base anything you want in Miami. I really do. And the reason you and I met is because my dad and I have started a company where we're trying to build studios around the country.
Hmm.
And we started off wanting to go to Florida first.
Right.
And I still, to this day, I would love to build a studio, some stages in Miami. I think it's a great place. And I think that people would love to be down there. I think the actors would like to be there. I think the producers would like to be there. And it's got everything you'd ever want to shoot in. So I'm high on Florida. I really like Florida, as there's so much sunshine. There's a lot of beach. There's everything you could want to shoot in. So
Well, we enjoy the kind words, and obviously the elephant in the room is how come you're not coming down here, and that's a whole separate podcast for a
that's,
whole
yeah,
separate
that's if
another
we want to talk
time.
politics and incentives someday, then we can. But yeah, I don't, that's not for this one. But
No,
yeah,
no, no.
we would love to come to Florida someday. Yeah, it's a dream of mine.
And the timing is everything, and I'm still hopeful that the timing will work out. If not right now, that we'll get there. But we really appreciate the kind words. That's great of you to say. And so this is us wraps, and you immediately move on to a producer role on Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez, which is on Hulu, which is a great show. The show has been nominated for 17 Primetime Emmy Awards. For those that may not have seen it because they're not as up on Hulu shows, tell us what the show is.
It's about three people who live in a high-priced Manhattan apartment building who start a podcast to solve a murder that happens in their building. And it's three extremely different people who are thrown together in a very hilarious way.
Mm-hmm.
They solve their murders both seasons. There's 2 seasons out there. Everyone in it is brilliant. It's the kind of show where I have to work hard to stay on par with the people working on the show because they're so good at their jobs.
You came in during season 2 after being on This Is Us from the very beginning. Now jumping into a series that's already been established. What's the difference?
I will say that I wanted to do season 1, and they gave it to Jill Risk, who did a great job. And luckily, she had to move on, and I got to get in for season 2 because I was green with envy and wanted to be on the show from the beginning. It's easier because it's established. The world is established. You're not starting from ground zero and making a million decisions or waiting for a million decisions to be made. Those decisions have been made. We have our marching orders. We can go. But on a show like Only Murders in the Building, the bar was set so high that we had our work cut out for us.
That makes sense. It's sometimes easier to edit a one pager because there's something to work with already as opposed to staring at a blank piece of paper. But sometimes a blank piece of paper, at least you can get your thoughts out from the very beginning and not have to try and ride over somebody else. So I get it, but obviously on a much smaller scale than what you're doing. Given the variety of television series you've worked over the last 20 years, besides just getting better with experience, how have you evolved as a producer?
Confidence. It's 100% confidence. I may not know the answer to everything, but I'm not scared not to know the answer. I know that there's no problem I can't solve in under 3 phone calls at this point. And that's the difference. And I think that I bring that to wherever I go. There's nothing that people can't throw at me that I haven't pretty much seen or seen someone else go through. I think that's it. I think the experience and the confidence to do what I do. And also, I mean, it's just the lack of fear that comes along with that. Before, I was terrified of budgetary issues and all the stuff that comes along with my job. But now I'm like, all right, I'll fix it. It'll be done. We can make this work. And as long as I make or help make a great television show, that's what matters. That's the end all be all. So that's it. I think, yeah, confidence, would say the number one thing.
And you and I have spoken a couple of times here, so I have a guess at the answer to this one, but what would you call your management style? Are you kind of a calming influence, or are you a little bit more high strung frantic in your leadership?
I would call it high strung family. I will fight to the death for my people. That is something I take unbelievable pride in. And it hurts me, conversely, when people don't buy into my program. Tim and I, my number 2, are on numerous shows all the time. We were doing 3 shows at once. We were finishing up This Is Us. We were on Only Murders in the Building, and the show Rabbit Hole, which is going to be on Paramount Plus coming out soon. They're finishing up the last episode right now. We're doing all 3 at the same time. Wow. And this whole COVID era of working from home and the Zooms that we're on, I take a lot of pride in trying to keep my team together, in trying to keep them sane. We've been through everything. Season 5 of This Is Us, that was the COVID year. That was the bad COVID. We had family members dying. One of my VFX guys in particular, they had multiple family members die of COVID. And really, us pulling together was a big deal. We hid pictures of people that died on picture frames in the background. That
Oh,
was our silent tribute. But yeah, it's what we do is crazy. It's deadline driven. So I am frantic and high strung at times, but I care. That's the main thing. I care about these people, and I try to make their lives as normal as possible because they're now at home sitting on a machine 12 hours a day with nobody. I mean, sure, they call their assistant or they're called their editor or whatever, but they're all alone.
hmm,
We do this thing on Fridays where we get all the teams together, all the different shows, and we do a thing called the Friday Jamboree, where we get everybody on Zoom all at once. And it was like at one point it was like 30 something people. Because when we were working on a lot, you'd be next to another show and you would get to know those people and you would get to know secrets about a machine or something that was lost when everybody was working at home.
right.
So I've really tried to keep these people engaged and happy and bring that family team mentality to everything. We do Everybody does a little elevator pitch, where we all talk about ourselves. We do a time card game where the first 3 people to get their time card turned in get ice cream delivered to their house. I mean, just anything, because we found out that there was a problem that you used to turn in the PA would walk around, hand out time cards, everybody fill them out, the PA pick them up and turn them in.
Right.
Everybody was left to their own volition, and we'd have people turning in time cards the day that the paychecks were coming out. So we turned a problem into a real opportunity. And it's fun because even though one of our assistant editors, Stacy, would roll her eyes at me and say, "You're always changing the rules," but it's fun, and it's something that builds up the team and the camaraderie, and you get to know about people from another show, which is lost in this era. So
Right.
my management style is a big deal to me, and taking care of my people is huge.
And that's great. I'm glad I asked that question because that was great to hear. So it goes a little bit into the our last obligatory question, which is, what advice do you have for those that look at your career and say, that's what I want? Like, how do they follow in your footsteps?
Never let go. Persistency. I mean, don't be a creepy stalker, but never give up. you know 3 weeks into my first job of being a PA, I realized that I was made for this. The controlled chaos that we work under is perfect for me. The pressure, everything that it is, I love it. I feed off of it. And I realized that this was it, and I was never, ever going to let go. And I was just going to do whatever it took to keep going. I didn't go to school for this. I lucked into my first job, but once I realized it, I never let go, and I just kept showing up, and until they told me not to, and nobody's told me not to yet. So that's my best advice. Just get your foot in the door and never give up.
And then, besides Only Murders in the Building, you mentioned your other show. Plug away. Where else should we see your name and credits?
Okay, we're working on 2 other projects other than Only Murders. Only Murders is we're kind of on hiatus right now. Well, we're definitely on hiatus right now. The writers are writing away on that. We start shooting that again later on in the year. So they just finished airing for the year. So there's really nothing for me to do right now. Then we're working on Rabbit Hole, which is going to be on Paramount Plus. It's Kiefer Sutherland. Think of a mature, smarter, with a heart version of 24, kind of. He's off
Okay.
saving the world again. He's really good at that. And that is from the directors that did the pilot of This Is Us, John and Glenn. They are, and that's the reason I took that. I wanted to work with them. I've wanted to work with them since the first wrap party of This Is Us, when I lost all my fear of working with them. And they are brilliant and smart and great guys. I really like them. And then I just got hired. Tim and I are going to work on The Company You Keep, the Milo
Hmm.
Ventimiglia pilot that just got picked up. So we've got that starting up end of October. That starts shooting. It's a really good pilot, and Milo is just Milo. I mean, I love working with Milo Ventimiglia. So that's why I'm there. And it's the old crew from This Is Us. So it's like going to my family. So yeah, those are the things I got coming up. I'm really excited about everything. I mean, I really am. I can't wait to get into the nitty gritty of doing, mixing the sound and color correction for Rabbit Hole, because man, they shot a beautiful show. It is so cinematic. And then back on Murders, it is going to be a huge season. This is the biggest season yet, and the star power is going to be phenomenal. It's a really good show. And then the Milo show, the Company You Keep, Bill Fichtner's in it. It's another one. It's going to be. I watched the pilot and I was like, wow, it's really good. So excited about all of it. Got that. I'm booked pretty solid till, I don't know, September of next year. So I guess for a year or so. So that's what I got coming up.
It's good to be busy.
Yeah, it's good to be busy for sure. So.
Well, Nick, I'm really glad that our paths crossed talking about your other endeavor with your dad, which led me to be able to have you on the podcast. I know obviously you can hear how busy you are, so I really appreciate the time you spent with us today to share your knowledge and your stories, and thanks for being on the Film Florida podcast.
Sure, anytime. It was a great pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org or visit our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you like what you hear on the podcast, please consider going to our website and donating $20.22 for our 2022 fundraising campaign. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at filmflorida.creator-spring.com, and please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.